Hey, thanks for checking out The Solid Verbal. Now would be a great time to subscribe to the channel for college football content all off season long.
What's your biggest question for Alex Grinch? If you had him on your show, like what answers do you want from him directly on how he's going to fix what was wrong last season? Because as you said, it's probably a collection of factors, but in looking at the efficiency numbers that Dan and I look at frequently, it's kind of a car crash. They were all bad. So where do you start
other
with
than
that?
Turnovers, other than
turnovers,
forced,
and I think starting field position on defense. Everything else is in the deep red. What would you want to pin him down and get from him, Ryan?
Yeah, the turnovers were a big, that was what kind of kept the defense afloat. And to be fair, like Alex Grinch has come on my show. When you talk to him, I don't know if there's anyone that's going to be more honest. I mean, USC fans hated when we would interview Clay Helton and you might lose to like Oregon State or something. And the first thing he would talk about is how hard they played and how proud he was. and fans just wanted to they would just want to jump off a building. They're like, what are you talking about? Alex Grinch will come out and say, we were god awful. Like that was the awful, we needed to tackle better. So I think he's really sort of upfront about when they have, the deficiencies and how bad they've been. Sometimes when they're really bad, we don't get to talk to Alex Grinch, so we don't get to hear that. But I think he's been pretty honest about most of his assessments of what's going on. And, the tackling has certainly been an issue. And sometimes when you hear from Lincoln Riley and he'll say, like, players were in the right position and they didn't make the tackle. To me, that's more of a saying like, hey, I think we had a good scheme. We just didn't have the right guys making plays. I look at it. I mean, when we see college football, there's so much offense going on. The wide receivers are great. You always have 3-4 great wide receivers. I think when you become an elite team, it's that defensive pass rush is really good. You got these elite, guys that are just coming off the edge and making sacks. And they had Tuli Tuipulotu lead the nation in sacks, but outside of that, they didn't really have anybody. And I feel like they got to get better there. And for years, they've just underperformed, I think, at the linebacker spot. They've had good players in the secondary, but just not getting that kind of production that you want out of the linebackers. And they got a couple young guys in this year. They bring in Mason Cobb from Oklahoma State, who was a kind of tackling machine. So they're trying to assess that. But to me, it's a lot of the front seven. You got to get a better, edge pass rush and just get better play out of the linebackers where I feel like they've had some talent. They just don't seem to be able to bring it there.
One of the things that's interesting you bring that up. One of the things I looked at before we started recording is where USC under Lincoln Riley is recruiting on defense. And SC famously, and it's not just a Pete Carroll thing, you look at Lane, Sark, even Clay Helton, went across the country looking for big defensive talent up front. And we got some great individual performances, but it's been a USC unit, the defensive line, the front seven, that hasn't, has sort of fallen off in these last 15, 20 years. And under Lincoln Riley, they haven't necessarily had the recruiting success on defense. And certainly you mentioned hitting the portal, and that's a vision for where USC can go on defense. But how do you, you use the word assess, but how do you assess what this staff has done on the trail? I looked it up. It was, I think, one blue chip defensive lineman in these past two classes, whereas, you look at the new Big Ten teams they're going to be facing, you're talking, 5, 6, 7, 8 guys. Oregon in the last couple of years is, 6, 7 guys, blue chip defensive linemen. Do you see this, ticking in an upwards direction these next couple of years? Should that be a piece of concern, or is it just going to be, all systems go to the portal on defense?
I think Lincoln Riley's vision was to not have to utilize the portal as much, even in year 2,
Right.
And I feel like they were recruiting last year for the class of 2023 on the potential. And I think now they're looking for 2024 it's usually like the year before, like, hey, this team did win 11 games and they were in the Pac-12 championship and all of that. It was a big turnaround. And I feel like they're getting a little bit more momentum in 2024, but they didn't have as successful of a recruiting class for 2023 as you would have liked, especially on the defensive side of the ball. They brought in some really studs on the offensive side, but they get Tackett Curtis, the linebacker out of Louisiana that they're in love with, and they really love him. But the big defensive linemen like an Anthony Lucas, who was a 5-star recruit, but transfers in from Texas A&M. They want to get those guys kind of out of high school and sort of develop them. So I feel like their focus is now on 2024, trying to get those guys into the program, the elite defensive players from high school, because they haven't, like you mentioned, they just haven't been able to land some of those guys, in the last couple of years. And, if they have more success on defense this year, like Lincoln Riley's talked about, and, what they really focused on, I think they will be able to have more success. I guess the fallback, though, is if you can't, then there's guys that are willing to come to LA for whatever reason and try their hand at playing for USC. But I think the focus, they would love to get that success from high school, but they didn't. They did pretty well in 2023 on offense, just not on the defensive side. So they'll try in 2024, and if not, like I said, like you guys mentioned, it'll be probably more, hitting the portal as hard as you can.